blood. War is afoot.
By the old gods and the new, Game of Thrones is back, except now it's called House of the Dragon. And if you loved the original show, I can report this will take you right back to its peak moments, you know, when it was good. Directed by Miguel Sapochnik, the premiere brought back a lot of the classic Game of Thrones hallmarks like sex, violence, and dragons, but it also reveals a huge secret that kind of changes everything we might know about Westeros. We've got the full breakdown and all the Easter eggs, but before we get into all of that, I have to warn you, we're about to spoil the premiere right now, so if you haven't seen it yet or you haven't read Fire and Blood, now would be the time to hop on your trusty fire-breathing dragon and peace out until we're done. Okay, now that we're past the spoiler warning, let's get right to it. The Targaryen kings of Westeros all knew about the dangers of the White Walkers and everything north of the Wall and passed the secret down through their successors to the Iron Throne, dating all the way back to Aegon the Conqueror. This is a huge deal, obviously, because it gives us a whole different perspective on Targaryen rule in Westeros in the first place. This is a massive secret that changes absolutely everything, and we gotta talk about it, so hang out with us. We're gonna get into what that means, but first let's do a quick recap to kind of explain how that secret got revealed. Right off the bat, we're gonna mention a book called Fire and Blood a few times. Written by George R.R. Martin, it covers the 300-year period of Targaryen rule, starting with Aegon the Conqueror and going all the way through the Mad King Daenerys Targaryen. House of the Dragon itself depicts a conflict called the Dance of Dragons, where dragon-riding Targaryens warred with each other over succession to the Iron Throne. Check that out if you want an idea of where this is all headed, but we have to mention that this big secret that the Targaryen kings all knew about the White Walkers is unique to the HBO series. It's not in the source material. Anyway, this story takes place in Westeros 172 years before Daenerys Targaryen, so the good folks of King's Landing shouldn't have a reason to worry when they see a lady with white hair riding a dragon over the city. The destruction brought by Daenerys is many, many years in the future. We first meet a character who, from a distance, could very well be mistaken for Daenerys herself, except it's her great and distant ancestor, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, daughter of King Viserys Targaryen, first of his name, who himself only gained the Iron Throne by being the previous king's oldest male relative, supplanting the king's own granddaughter due to the ancient laws of dynastic misogyny. With that succession battle done comes a brand new succession problem. Who will be King Viserys' heir? His eldest daughter, Rhaenyra, who is a girl, gross. His brother Daemon, who most except the king can agree is a bit of a sadistic dickhead, or the king's new baby on the way, prophesies to be the long-wanted obvious male heir. It's the baby, right? As a joust in honor of the new presumed boy is underway, Queen Aemma, Viserys' beloved wife, goes into labor, which quickly takes a turn and becomes an extremely difficult and likely deadly birth. Desperate for the son he's always dreamed of, the king makes the solo decision to go forward with a crude cesarean section that the Grand Maester tells him will definitely kill his wife in favor of giving the baby a chance to survive. In true Game of Thrones fashion, the incredibly violent and painful operation goes forward and Aemma dies horribly and bloodily. The baby, a boy, lives only briefly before also soon dying. Rhaenyra is devastated to learn of her beloved mother's death and ruefully wonders if her father was finally satisfied in the few hours he had a male heir. Daemon also has an emotional response, and by that I mean he throws a drunken group sex party to celebrate the baby being dead, ergo, he's still second in line for the crown. Word of this gets back to Viserys. The king, angry and tired of defending Daemon for being terrible, disowns him and banishes him for said terribleness, officially naming Rhaenyra the heir. The lords of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms bend the knee and pledge fealty to uphold and protect the future Queen Rhaenyra, and Daemon leaves King's Landing on Dragonback, but not before some uncomfortable flirting with his teenage niece, Targaryen, laying the track for a bunch of drama to come. And amidst all the talk of succession comes the secret that has the most effect on how we see the world of Westeros for generations to come. Where A Song of Ice and Fire was all about secret Targaryens, House of the Dragon is more about Targaryen secrets. King Viserys reveals to Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra alone, that he and all the previous Targaryen rulers and their heirs knew all about the White Walkers, and the very reason their ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, took over as ruler of Westeros was not simply for the sake of conquest, but to unite the kingdoms in Westeros against the Night King's forces, which he foresaw as the end of the world of men. Viserys makes sure to emphasize that the only way they can all stand a chance is if everyone is united. This means the entire point of Targaryen rule was to fight the Night King and his army of Frosty Boys. Very ominous, and stakes are high. Except for the fact that we know in the future, in a time when a Targaryen isn't ruling and Westeros is not united, Arya Stark will solo the Night King and end the Long Night, while Targaryen descendants Jon Snow and Daenerys launch the most inept siege defense imaginable. Game of Thrones Season 8 strikes again! But I digress. The revelation itself is still a huge deal. If the secret was more widely known, or at least not lost to time, could Westeros have stopped the White Walkers sooner than they did? Could the whole Game of Thrones, Baratheon, Lannister, Stark conflicts and their ripple effects have ended before they began? Could there have been happy, long lives in the cards for Ned Stark, Robb Stark, Catelyn Stark, Talisa Stark, Hodor, Shireen Baratheon, Jorah Mormont, Lyanna Mormont, Margaery Tyrell, Oberyn Martell, Theon Greyjoy, Jaime, Cersei, all their kids, a lot of direwolves, and like thousands more people? One can only speculate. But also, where did this noble Targaryen monarch's secret get lost? Daenerys certainly didn't know in her time, and most likely neither did her brother Viserys III, Dany's brother, who was about 7 years old when his older brother Rhaegar Targaryen died. There is a good chance this secret was lost with Rhaegar when future King Robert introduced his warhammer to his dome at the Battle of the Trident. And for that, we should rename this video, How Robbie B Screwed an Entire Generation. The Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, may also carry the blame for killing Daenerys' father, Aerys the Mad King, but hey, he was definitively mad, so who knows if he could have gotten the message to young Varys, who, as you'll recall, also kind of sucked. Really, Rhaegar was the last best chance for strong, not mad Targaryen ruling, and even though the secret likely died with him, his son Aegon, who we know as Jon Snow, eventually figured it out for himself and worked toward the same objective once he did. A quick way to sum up House of the Dragon is Game of Thrones if every player is Targaryen. The show states this pretty plainly by immediately saying, the only thing that could tear down the House of the Dragon is itself. Our first two players, Princess Rhaenys Velaryon and her cousin Viserys I, who claimed to be the old King Jaehaerys Targaryen's heir. Now, if succession weren't patriarchal to its own detriment, Rhaenys would have been uncontested queen, and she was said to be clever, brave, an excellent dragon rider, and had two heirs of her own, as pointed out by her ever-loyal and ambitious husband, the Sea Snake, Lord Corlys Velaryon. She ceded her claim when her cousin Viserys was chosen as heir by the Great Council at Harrenhal, but this Targaryen princess remains in the wings. Our next player is Viserys' younger brother, Prince Daemon Targaryen, the heir presumptive, known for being brash, ambitious, dangerous, crude, a womanizer, and terrible with money, though simultaneously one of the best warriors of his time and apparently pretty charming when he wants to be. Next, we have Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, who is explicitly named heir at the end of episode 1 as King Viserys' oldest and currently only child. I say currently because, well, Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin exists, and we're only at episode 1 right now. This brings us to the Hightowers. Sir Otto Hightower is Hand of the King and Daemon's bitter rival. He encourages his daughter Alicent, Rhaenyra's best friend and about her age, to endear herself to the king. Big time spoiler alert! According to Fire and Blood, she's his next wife, queen, and the mother of his younger children. Rhaenyra's best friend, literally creating succession rivals? The drama, the betrayal. It's the Game of Thrones.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
The Dance of Dragons is ultimately a story of war and ruin, and this show drops us in during the preamble as every piece is getting set up. Remember the absolute ruin of the Targaryen line as we see it at the beginning of Game of Thrones? Several things need to happen between the peak of undoubted rule and purported Targaryen godliness and a weak point by the time of Robert's Rebellion, when dragons, the Targaryen symbol of power mind you, are considered to be all but extinct. At some point, and likely sometime this season, what has to happen is for the last vestige of peace, King Viserys, to die, and for the succession question to be aggressively fought over by all the players. Using fire and blood as a guide, advantageous marriages are soon to happen, children of the next generation will be born and grow into headstrong adults, mind you. There will be bastardly accusations, and yes, some weird unions are going to happen too. Eventually, we're going to see the ugly side of nearly every player, as well as a great reduction of how the all-powerful House of the Dragon is viewed, not to mention their money, assets, and unfortunately, yes, a bunch of dragons are gonna die. Along the way, expect the other great houses of the Seven Kingdoms to come into play, change, and ultimately shape into the Westeros we're already familiar with. So far, the show looks very promising. Even disturbingly so. I'll admit it, I didn't want to trust this world again after the end of Game of Thrones totally broke my heart and goodwill. But like a toxic ex creeping back into our lives, is it possible the show has changed? Watching episode 1 made me feel as intrigued and interested as I had felt at the peak of Game of Thrones, when I could confidently call it one of the best shows on television. It may be too early to tell, but I think I might be naively ready to give this X another chance. It looks so good, but there is still a lot of time to tell, and unless any of you happen to know a three-eyed raven, then we've got 9 more episodes this season to figure it all out. Can I offer you some Easter eggs in this trying time? Maybe 1 or 2 actually have a cute little dragon inside. Here are the details we saw in this episode. The cat's paw dagger. King Viserys is seen wearing it throughout this episode. This Valyrian steel dagger with a dragon bone hilt is seen in Game of Thrones, used by an assassin sent to kill Bran in season 1. The Starks incorrectly deduced that it came from Tyrion Lannister, and this indirectly kicks off the War of the Five Kings. It pops up again in season 7 when it's then thought to have belonged to Littlefinger, and then Arya Stark actually uses it to execute Littlefinger and later the Night King. It's last seen on Arya's belt as she sails away. Maybe if we get that Jon Snow sequel series we've been talking about, we might get an update on Arya and what could be the most important dagger in the history of Westeros. Rhaenyra's dragon, Syrinx, and Daemon's dragon, Caraxes, were the only live beasts we saw in this episode, but we also saw the skull of Balerion the Black Dread. King Viserys tells Princess Rhaenyra the secret about the White Walkers in front of the giant skull of this fearsome and storied dragon. Viserys is the chillest king around, but back in his day, he too was a dragon rider. He was the last Targaryen to ride Balerion before the massive ancient beast died in 94 AC. The first to ride was Aegon the Conqueror. This is also the dragon whose flames melted a pile of swords into the Iron Throne. We see Balerion's skull again in Game of Thrones when Dum-Dum Cersei damages the skull with a giant scorpion bolt. King's Landing and the Red Keep. Yes, this is the very place where Jaime and Cersei die in the Game of Thrones finale. King's Landing and the Red Keep are starkly close to how we're used to seeing them 172 years in the future, like when Rhaenyra and Alicent cross through Maegor's Hold, which is notably where Cersei places a large floor-sized map of Westeros. The Iron Throne, however, looks much different, with more pointy, scrapey pieces to potentially cut yourself and prove your unworthiness, and is overall more imposing and asymmetrical. Harrenhal is shown in the show's opening scene. It's the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, but it's also seen as kind of a curse. It dates back to the time of Aegon the Conqueror, when he and Balerion the Black Dread blasted it and King Harren with dragonfire during the War of Conquest. This is where the Lannister army held Arya prisoner in Game of Thrones Season 2. Maegor the Cruel is perhaps fittingly, disdainfully name-dropped a few times in the premiere as an important character in Targaryen history. Son of Aegon the Conqueror and third king, he's a pretty notorious figure for being violent and brutal. You know the saying about greatness and madness being two sides of the same coin? Every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. It was probably made about him, and for bad reasons. Sometimes the whole impregnate your sister thing doesn't work. Who could have guessed? But what did you think of the House of the Dragon premiere? How did you feel about returning to Westeros, and do you think we'll see more White Walkers in this series? Let us know what you think, but not down in the comments. Send a raven. Slower and way less reliable that way. Anyway, thanks for watching this episode of Canon Fodder, and for more House of the Dragon, here's how the show plays with Fire and Blood's version of history. And don't forget to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.